I promise you there will be plenty of kayaks and kayaking in this presentation, but for the next hour, we're going to zoom out a little further and talk more broadly about the risks and rewards of adventuring solo, whether that's in a kayak, on a bike, with a backpack, or anything else. And I think the best place to start is by acknowledging the universal number one rule in safety, which is don't do it alone. Don't go out alone. Don't do it. And I want to be very clear that I am not advocating or even encouraging that anyone should venture into the backcountry by themselves. This is not something that everyone finds, has a desire or much less an interest to do, and that is totally okay. In fact, I think that's probably a wise sentiment to hold because it is true that when you step out and do any sport or activity by yourself, you are inherently raising the risk of a host of different things. So, with that being said, there are some people who do have an interest in going out on an adventure on their own in any kind of domain. And whether it's because you have an interest to do that for yourself, or maybe you have a desire to go on an adventure and you haven't quite found a person to go with and maybe you're curious about what that could look like to do it on your own. I'm hoping that everyone can take something helpful away from this presentation, regardless of whether you do something by yourself or do something with a group. Okay, who am I? I'm Katie. Like Kevin said, I'm based in Boulder, Colorado. Not a lot of sea kayaking happening in Colorado. I've been solo adventuring to more of extended kind of immersive way since 2022. Well, actually, it's 2020 and some shorter backpacking kind of road tripping trips before that and since then as well. He said, I work in the space industry. I consult young companies across the space economy, doing anything from developing new types of propulsion, launch operations, on orbit operations, and then also bringing data and information back from space to Earth and delivering that to customers. My current passion project is writing a novel, which I've been working on for 2 years, and I'm at least 3 years away from the first draft, but it's been a really amazing experience. And last but not least, my favorite cereal is Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Oh, and this picture is from White Cliff Islets. Yes, yes, it is. This past September.
The previous one was two, wasn't it, Katie?
Good eye. Yes, yes, it is. Yep. Yeah, sea fog. Yep, it's when the fog rolled in. Very, very pretty though. Okay, and why should you listen to me? My solo adventuring bona fides include primarily three different sports. Bike packing in 2022 was kind of my first and maybe longest solo adventure when I mountain biked for 10 weeks from New Mexico up to Banff and then out to Tofino. That was a solo and unsupported trip. It was about 10 and a half weeks. And then later that year, I hopped on a plane and went to Nepal, where I trekked around the Khumbu Valley region for a month, getting into some pretty remote, really beautiful villages that were 17,000 plus feet in elevation. Um, and then, of course, kayaking. And that includes river kayaking inland as well as coastal sea kayaking. Like Kevin said, 9 days down the Green River, which took me through different kinds of land in terms of having to piece together logistics of getting permits from Bureau of Land Management for some sections, permits from the national parks for other sections, and so on. So that was a whole new set of skills and logistics. And then most recently, 2 months doing a mix of kayaking, biking, and backpacking on Vancouver Island and Sunshine Coast. Okay, the too long didn't read version of the risks and rewards of solo adventuring. Obviously, this list is not exhaustive, but I wanted to highlight some areas where the risks are either unique or exacerbated when you're alone. And starting with increased errors. When you're with the group, you are naturally working together, many brains coming together to solve a problem. And so you kind of have a built-in mechanism for spotting and resolving errors before they get implemented. When you're on your own, you have to be sure to slow down a little bit, take your time, and double and triple check some of the most important factors or most important decisions within a collection of decisions that you might have to make. One of them being navigation. Anxiety and loneliness, whether you're out there for a few hours or days or weeks at a time by yourself, um, it 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 kind of inherently invites, your inner demons to rear their ugly heads. So you have to be cognizant of what those things are and also how to address them when these feelings will naturally arise. Increased vulnerability. I put in parentheses predators, and honestly, that can be either humans or animals. When you're traveling in a group, you become a lot less vulnerable of a target, and that is very true when you're traveling alone. You have to kind of, we'll talk about it, but there are some things that you can do to help protect yourself, and stay alert a little bit more. A lack of redundancy. For example, when it comes to gear, if you're traveling in a group, oftentimes many people in that group will be carrying the same items. So if something of yours happens to fail, for example, a water filter, or a stove, you probably have someone else in the group who you can switch to their gear and they can share. When you're by yourself, unless you plan on carrying duplicates of absolutely everything, you will probably run into some situations where um, you have to, we'll talk about this a little bit more too, get a little creative or seriously think about what are the highest, um, most important objects in your pack, and maybe thinking about ways to create redundancy in those. For example, water. It might not make sense to carry two whole water filters on the off chance that your primary fails, but maybe adding in some water purification tablets to your pack in case your filter fails is a good option. Knowledge gaps. Again, when you are in your group, you're naturally with people who are bringing their own experiences and skills, to the table, to the group. When you're on your own, it's impossible to be an expert in every domain, but getting enough information, to kind of cover the basics is a must. I like to say that when I'm out on my own, I kind of, in a way, have to think of myself as a doctor, a chef slash nutritionist, a therapist, and if I'm on my bike, a mechanic. And that includes like going and taking a master mechanics course so that I have skills that I can do roadside maintenance or trailside maintenance if I get a flat tire or if my derailleur breaks or something like that. Um, Again, it's unrealistic to get a medical degree right before you go out, but again, having basics can be very helpful. Logistical and medical emergencies. Again, when you're by yourself and you capsize, if you are too tired or exhausted or for whatever reason cannot get back in your boat, with a self-rescue, you have others to assist you. When you're by yourself, and maybe you miscalculated how long it would take to cross a channel, and during that time a storm blew in and then suddenly you missed the tidal exchange. Situations can deteriorate very rapidly, so you have to be extra cautious with every move you make to try and prevent getting in those situations, which leads me to my last point of I couldn't find any hard statistics on this, but anecdotally, I'm going to say that if you are adventuring alone, you are more likely to have a situation where you'll have to depend on local SAR resources. And I want to be careful here because there are emergencies, and when those happen, you should absolutely call these resources. That is why they exist. You should not be discouraged from using those resources. However, we'll talk about some ways to prevent getting in some of the situations where you might have to. Basically, trying to prevent even getting in a situation where you would have to rely on those resources. On the flip side, there are a ton of rewards with adventuring solo that I have yet to experience or find when I'm in a group of people or even with one other person. You get to apply your skills in new creative ways that you could never think of, except for the situations that you often happen to find yourself in. You learn more about yourself and maybe some places where you've underestimated yourself or overestimated yourself. You get beautiful, uninterrupted time and solitude and connectivity to the earth and to nature. And I know that sounds really cheesy, but in those moments of uninterrupted quietness, I've had some of my most original thoughts, things that even maybe surprised me, and some ideas that have gone on to be actualized that maybe I couldn't have had if I were in a conversation or didn't have that opportunity to let my mind truly wander without a limit on it. um, get to observe and interact with the world in a new way. Even if you're around people, when you're by yourself and you're kind of in a crowd-ish setting, you're going to be interacting with those people differently when you're on your own versus with a friend or with a group of friends. Um, you get to learn new things, new skills. Obviously, there's a ton of transferable skills from one sport to another. Um, but in most cases, just by going somewhere new, even if it's in the same mode of transportation, you're inherently going to be learning and preparing um, for this new place that maybe you haven't explored before. Obviously, there are a ton of feelings of accomplishments, little micro ones that happen throughout each day. And then, of course, this kind of big exhale accomplishment of like, wow, I just did this thing by myself. It feels very empowering. Um, and then obviously getting to bring all of these experiences and these stories and these pictures and these feelings home wherever that is and get to share them with friends and family. Okay, so it's not for everyone. So let's talk about the kind of personality that might thrive doing something like this. So does this sound like you? Are you cool under pressure? When things go sideways, do you tend to get really flustered and frustrated, and, you know, kind of become a bit paralyzed in indecision? Or is it interesting and intriguing and energizing to you and you kind of lean into it? Um, are you an ambivert? Meaning, do you feel comfortable both as an introvert doing things on your own, as well as being an extrovert and it- having those qualities of an extrovert as well. You genuinely need both of those qualities and to feel comfortable in both of those places when you are adventuring solo, because even when you're out here in the middle of nowhere, Utah, at some point you're going to run into other people, or maybe you're going to need help, and you're going to need to be very comfortable approaching complete and utter strangers. And a lot of that also has requires an inherent trust in other people and a belief that most people have goodness inside of them. And I found that when you approach people and approach the world with those beliefs, you tend to get that back. Um, Not always, so you have to be smart and keep your intuition up in your gut, but yeah, most people are good. Jane Goodall said there are helpers all around, and she's 1,000% correct. Okay, having a high risk tolerance. I don't mean that you're a daredevil. I mean that you are comfortable analyzing and honestly assessing risk, and that if you need to take a somewhat riskier step in order to get to from this place to this place, that you are comfortable with having with making that decision if it needs to get done. It's not that you have to be here all the time. It's that if you have to, you can work through that. Are you organized? Do you like to plan? Do you have a lot of Google Docs? Do you have a lot of books and, marks on web pages and that kind of thing? Is your gear organized? Are you a minimalist? Are you conceptual? Are you the kind of person who can, in your mind's eye, say, okay, I would love to go kayak desolation sound, and you can sit in your chair and you can actually envision yourself at every step of the way to anticipate, how do I need to even pack the car? How should the weight be distributed? How much water should I be drinking? And should I be taking with me? How many calories? Like every little step. Can you conceptualize beginning to end a trip like that? I don't know that it's mandatory, but it's certainly helped me in that planning and getting comfortable ahead of a trip. Do you experience fear as excitement? Again, not in a daredevil way, but there are a lot of things that can happen throughout a normal day when you're adventuring on your own that 50% of the population will see as scary. And when you're operating from a place of fear, you're often not making the best decisions. And then I feel like the other half of the population can approach a similar or be maybe confronted with that same obstacle and see it as excitement. And it's literally the same thing. It's just two different ways of approaching the same problem. And it helps when you're on your own to approach something as exciting rather than scary. Are you decisive? Can you make a decision fairly quickly and trust your gut to do so and help in that process and not be stuck in rumination for the hours or days afterward? Because again, if you're spending time and energy worrying if you made the right decision yesterday, then you're not in the moment, focused on all of the dynamic things that are happening in that moment at that time. And last but not least, are you a good multitasker? And do you enjoy that? If you're in the kayak, right, you have an understanding of what are the tides doing? Um, how fast are the currents running? When does the tidal exchange occur? What is the wind doing right now? What is the boat traffic like? What is my hearing on my radio? All of these things that are happening. How much daylight is left? Am I hungry? How do I feel? So if this sounds like you, then you might like adventuring solo. Okay, so let's say hypothetically we've all identified ourselves as one of those people. Now, how do we look at this list and what are some steps that we can take to minimize and mitigate these risks so that we don't become a statistic? 80% of risk mitigation happens before you even leave home. It's that conceptualizing phase, it's that planning phase, it's the information gathering and skills building phase. So we're going to talk about 6 steps. The first is introspection. Again, knowing yourself. Okay, a lot of us have maybe read the book or seen the movie Wild. Um, I don't recommend venturing out into the backcountry by yourself to find yourself. I think that's a pretty dangerous proposition. I'm glad Cheryl Strayed made it out, but I don't recommend that everyone runs out there to try and find themselves. Try and know as much of yourself as you can before you go out there so that you understand your blind spots. So that if you know you don't find this part of the process exciting, or it's just not, it's something that you always tend to forget, then you have to be extra diligent and intentional to plan to do that thing so that it doesn't get skipped. Knowing your blind spots is incredibly helpful. Also, how to self-soothe. When you get out there and you're anxious and you're lonely or something happens or you get scared, knowing how to help yourself out of those situations is crucial. And that can be something small, like packing a couple of your favorite snacks and saving them for those moments. It can be singing a song, like whatever that thing is, just know it ahead of time so that when that moment arises, you know what to do. Okay, hard information, like actual tangible facts information. I did much of my pre-planning from Colorado for the Vancouver Island trip. So that meant for months and months and months ahead of time, ordering charts and the paddling maps and looking at other maps, using the BC Marine Trails app online, and then literally calling ahead to local marinas and paddle shops in the places I would be going to, and just asking them questions. I found other people's blogs and I actually reached out to them and set up informational just Zoom calls where we've both got our charts out and we're looking at things and we're talking about their route and the route I am looking at, and they're giving me real-time feedback from a place of they may live there kind of a thing. That information is really invaluable. Um, Oh, and then when you get to places, go stop in at shops, whether you're backpacking, like go stop in the local backpackers mercantile or the local hostel there. And just ask them questions. Buy a candy bar and then stay for 15 minutes and just ask them a bunch of questions. Introduce yourself, tell them where you're planning to go. And you'll often get a lot of really helpful information that way. And then obviously read books and join clubs. Um, Hard skills, classes and certifications. Again, before I went out on the um, Great Divide route, I did a master mechanics course and as many classes as I could possibly get my hands on. And in a place like Boulder, there's a big biking culture. So there was a lot of ways to get connected and to practice and go for shakeout rides and that kind of thing. For sea kayaking, not so much in Boulder. I had done a little bit in the previous couple years out off the west side of Vancouver Island. Um, but then outside of that, it's mostly rivers and reservoirs and that kind of thing. Um, so I took a few more classes in the first couple weeks that I was in on Vancouver Island and kind of stayed in the same place with a friend, and we would go out for long day trips and just practice self-rescues all day long. We'd go out in different tidal situations and just practice, practice, practice. And same even before leaving Boulder, a friend took me out to the local reservoir and we just practiced self-rescue. Like he would just dump my boat over and we would just do it over and over and over again. Um, and then let's see. Currently, I'm working on my WFR, which is a wilderness first responder certification, and that includes wilderness first aid as well as assisting in kind of the extraction part of first responder. So getting someone prepared to be extracted by a SAR service. And that class is through an organization called Knowles. I think they're based in Wyoming. But I think they operate globally, but there's a lot of different certifications and organizations depending on where you are. And then, yes, obviously a lot of the skills are transferable. between sports and activities. Gear. Okay. There's nothing more fun than being a gearhead and talking gear, but it's incredibly important to make sure that your gear fits properly. And sometimes that takes a lot of time, and adjusting before you even get your boat on the water, for example. Go for quality. And there's usually a reason why something is more expensive. And if it's because the material will stand up to more types of weather that you plan to be in, um, it's go for it. There are certain pieces of equipment that I consider safety equipment, and those should be maintained religiously, rinsed, taken care of. Seasonal gear should be waterproofed. I don't have to tell you all. You know the drill. Gear is important. Oh, electronics though. Know how to use them. Actually know, like go out and practice all the features well in advance. Know how to use your electronics before you take them out. That's one that in the past I've definitely overestimated myself beforehand. Walkthroughs. Don't just make lists, but actually get everything physically together and put it in front of you, so that you get eyes on it. Again, part of it is just a extra precaution of getting eyes on all of your gear to confirm that it is in proper order and in good shape and in safe condition. Um, does anything need to be sharpened? Does anything need to be patched, etc.? In the preparation phase is also when you can rely on friends and get help and input from other people in the planning process. Go through walkthroughs. Have someone go for a beer or whatever and say, friend, just like give me 5 different scenarios. And they can be ridiculous scenarios, but they're just meant to give you an opportunity to kind of stress test what you have had in your head, and walk through ahead of time to find any pieces of gear or knowledge that you maybe can acquire before you set out. Before you set out. Okay. And then documentation. Very, very important. Digital and physical documentation. Before I leave, I have I created a Google Doc of kind of where I think I'll be and when, what my communications plan is. I will always have a satellite device on me, and usually once a morning I send the same 3 people a message that says, "Hey, I'm packed up and I'm heading out for the day." And then I have another message in the evening that says, "Hey, I just got to the place that I'm going to be camping for the night." And if you don't hear from me for one, or if I skip 1 or 2 of those, then like here's the plan of action after that. That document also has like these people have keys to my apartment, my financial planner, my estate executor, my medical directives person, family, friends. And then the other important thing is that all of them also have this document. So they all know the plan. It just hasn't, I haven't like just put it down on a piece of paper and like put it in my drawer. Everyone who's mentioned in that document also has that document and also knows of each other and the plan. And that it does a number of things, but it also, if heaven forbid something were to happen and I'm unconscious, wow, unconscious, I'm not worrying about that. I'm only worrying about getting better. And the same with the people who are part of that action plan. They're not worrying about what my wishes are or whatever. Like they just know exactly what to do, and then they can also help me in getting better. Also having that on you physically in your chart case, having all of your information, your emergency contact information, your course, um, all of that. Yep. Okay. Okay. Also, 80% of risk mitigation happens after you've left home. That's right. You can never be too cautious. 80% before and another 80% afterward. And this is where vigilance really comes in. There's a book and has a really long title, and I have it at the end of my presentation. But it talks about, kind of how you move through the world, and there's different levels of alertness. There's like white, yellow, red, etc. And condition yellow is kind of where your default should be, just on the normal course through life. It's a relaxed but alert state where you're not expecting trouble, but you're aware and you would recognize issues as they arise. So you're not paranoid, but you're not earbuds in, eyeballs to the ground kind of a thing. Like you're aware of what's happening around you. And on that note, I like to, anyone who's a chef or has worked in a restaurant knows this term mise en place, and it refers to when you're cooking before you actually start cooking and you turn the stove on, you have every ingredient chopped and measured and in its little bowl so that when you start to make that soup, you just have to dump the ingredients in at the right time. They're already prepared right in front of you. I do the same before I set out on any kind of trip. And this is a terrible picture, but the only one I have from in a kayak. Before I even get in the water, I have it totally loaded. Everything is on the deck, everything is in the hatches. I'm sitting in my boat and I'm pretending like I'm paddling, and then I run through some scenarios. And I learned a number of things when I did this last time, because for me it was a new kayak. One was, even though I had a day hatch, I could open it, but from in the boat, I could not put the hatch cover back on. So I needed to reevaluate and reshift where I put things when I'm on the water. And because I was in Canada, those are wine gums, which is my fuel of choice while I'm in Canada. The other things that I noticed while doing this walkthrough was if I had my deck light, fog light installed center of the deck, then it obstructed my view to my deck compass. So I then needed to then I knew to offset that light by a few inches to the left or to the right. It's small things like that that it doesn't they don't seem big, but when you're on the water and fog rolls in or whatever happens, and suddenly maybe that place you thought you could pull over for a snack actually was inaccessible at that time for tide or whatever, maybe the beach was closed, and you're in your boat a little longer, having everything, your mise en place, everything you need within reach is critical and is a matter of safety. Okay, even more introspection. You can never have too much introspection. Check in with yourself regularly. It's easy to like get 8 hours into an activity and then you realize that you're hungry, you're exhausted, you you're not making you're not making very good decisions anymore. Even if you need to set a timer for every 2 to 4 hours or something that says, hey, check in with yourself. How are you feeling? Do you need some food? Do you need to take a rest? Is very important in having a safe adventure. Trusting your gut. We've all had a lifetime of experience, and those feelings that bubble up often are telling us something that maybe we're ignoring in that moment with our brains. And then proactively practicing self-care. That could be anything from a little morning ritual. For me, it is waking up, boiling water, and eating my homemade oatmeal that has a little bit of chocolate and maybe a little dollop of peanut butter on top. But if I don't start my day with that, my whole day is off. Like it's just my ritual that mentally resets me for each day. And then resourcefulness. This is when we get to practice all of those things that all those random things we've been learning all of our lives and actually apply them in really creative ways. And that can be a really fun process. There's often 100 ways to skin a cat. And there's something unique about being on your own and coming up with a new solution to a new problem that's really fulfilling and really exciting. And having confidence in yourself, but also having fun. That's what this is all about. If it's not fun, we wouldn't be doing anything for the most part. Um, so yes. Okay, I'm gonna run through these for time, but I wanted to maybe tell a couple stories from the Great Divide mountain bike route. So the main route goes from the US-Mexico border to Banff. It's around 2,700 miles and a little over 200,000 feet of elevate of net gross elevation gain, with the highest pass being Indiana Pass in Colorado at around 12,000 feet. Um, and it just through a lot of different kinds of landscapes. So some days it was snowing and blizzarding and freezing cold, and other days it was 102 degrees and hot and humid. And so having to adapt to all these different environments while kind of doing the same activity over and over again, it was honestly 80% mental and 20% physical. But it was a really amazing trip. But there was definitely a few times where I had to really assess in real time and make some hard decisions. In some cases, there wasn't an ideal solution in front of me. So you just have to make a decision and commit to it. Um, yeah. So one of the places I had to ride through was about a 180-mile stretch through the Great Basin or the Red Desert of Wyoming, where there's no water refill opportunities, etc. And when I was there, it just so happened that it was gusting over 55 miles an hour winds with sustained winds over 45 miles an hour, and it was all headwind. Um, and so before I entered the Red Desert, the last water refill was in a town called Rollins. And so my bike is heavy with like 6 liters of water or something ridiculous like that to last me these next few days of riding through the desert. So I had to make a decision of riding in this wind is horrendous. I can take this day and hunker down and hope that it's better tomorrow. But if it's not, then I've just wasted a whole day of water, which means that if something were to happen when I get going again, an injury or a flat tire or something, and I find myself out there even longer than expected, then I don't have that extra water. So but I can't just tap out because I'm in the middle of a desert. So like you have to make decisions even if there's not a best decision in front of you. So this is a video that I took. I'll just play some of it um, from that time. Nothing out here, no cars, no sign of life. It's windy as all hell. All I've seen are bones of dead animals, garbage. Yep. Welcome to the Great Basin. Okay. So it was really windy. And it was just going straight through my like nasal passage and just drying out my throat, and it was pretty miserable. But I learned something on that trip, which is one of the ways that I self-soothe is by singing. I just sing whatever I see in front of me. I'm not even singing a song, but for whatever reason, that makes me feel better. Um, so in that particular case, I did end up continuing to ride, even though I was only making about 2 to 3 miles per hour. I just knew that any progress was progress in that moment. And the wind died down when the sun set, which was near summer solstice, so the days were pretty long. So I ended up riding through the night and then just kind of, well, I'll get there. But this is a video I took later that same evening.
Oh, I didn't even check the time. I don't know. It's 10, 30, 11, maybe a little later. decided to ride into the night for many reasons. Wind finally died down. It's cool. It actually feels quite nice. I've only been, I haven't actually been scared. I've just been jumpy because at one point there were a bunch of cows in the road and I scared them and they all got up and ran away and I was like, woo! And there were like a group of like ducks or geese or pheasant or chickens or whatever. I think animals kind of gravitate toward the road at night because it retains some of the warmth from the sun. Anyway, I let it a woo as they like woof 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 with their wings away. I'm just about halfway to my next town. It's about 130 something miles total. I think I'm a 65, 66 right now. And I'm gonna take a little break. I've been listening to music on my
So one thing, like looking back on these videos, it's been a couple years now, is it was so it wasn't clear at the time, but it's clear to me now how much adrenaline had actually kicked in to help me continue pushing through the night. And yes, I was writing at night, so my pupils were really dilated, but just hearing my voice, like I had been biking for I don't know 14 hours and I still adrenaline was helping me going. Um, but I ended up kind of just getting so tired and pulling over on the dirt road at like 2:30 in the morning. Didn't put my tent up or anything. I just kind of laid my pad out in my sleeping bag and got some sleep, and I was surprisingly refreshed in the morning. I think that was the adventure part of it kicking in as well. It was exciting. Oh, and then the extrovert part, like it- I can't tell you how many amazing relationships and how many amazing people I've met uh, while adventuring solo. It gives you an opportunity to interact with people in a way that we rarely get to. And I think it's partially because you're really vulnerable. Yeah, I'm like, I don't have anything. Like I'm on my bike. I've got like nothing of value, like it's just me. And it's just a really refreshing way to be a human in the world. Okay, I know I'm kind of running out the clock, but I'll just quickly flip through some of the pictures from the trip down the Green River. Um, that one was a whole different set of skills where it was over 100 degrees every day. So I was relying and learning about the fantastic properties of evaporative cooling and wearing long sleeves and a hood and a hat and dunking yourself in water just so that in the process of evaporation, it actually cools your body down substantially. Um, just little creative things. I got out to take a hike along one of the canyons that had this old dirt road on it, but I couldn't see, it was so steep down to the river. When I was up there, I couldn't see where my kayak was. So I ended up using rocks so that when I walked back, I didn't overshoot like where my kayak was. Just all these random little things that you would never think about, but in the moment, you just find creative ways to to do it. Um, this one was cool. So I floated down the Green River to the confluence into the Colorado just past there. And then the only way to get out, because there's no roads or anything along this 110-mile section of the river, is by hiring a riverboat to pick your kayak up or your canoes and then go back up the Colorado River back to Moab. So it was a really cool experience. Yeah, it was really hot, but I would dunk it, I would dunk everything in water all throughout the day to try and stay cool. But that was a really incredible experience. Okay, I will leave you with my must-haves, which are pretty basic. Have a good plan, which includes ample preparation and skills, acquiring skills and practice. Have a good GPS. I have a love-hate relationship with Garmin. I think their product lines are completely convoluted, and I hate their subscription packages, but they do have the best service that I've seen so far. So I have cycling GPS, marine GPS, and just a basic inReach device. And then a good attitude. Nothing can replace just having a good attitude and being in a constant state of that condition yellow while you're out doing whatever activity. A few resources, again, not an exhaustive list, but just some things that I referenced. That condition yellow comes from a book called The 7 Steps to Personal Safety. And then the middle book is a book that I've started and I haven't finished it yet, but it's definitely worth putting in here. It's called Deep Survival: Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why. And it's just case study after case study, analyzing accidents, etc., and kind of what went wrong, and then personalities and all of that. And then the wilderness first responder course that I mentioned from Knowles. Oh, if you want to stay in touch, I do have a blog. It only gets updated when I'm actually doing something. Um, so it'll go a year or more with no updates, but there's some good posts on there. Here's my email, WhatsApp. Yeah.